It's 10 p.m. Do you know where your children are?
Since the very first 10 o'clock newscast aired on WNYW TV in the late 1960s, it's always been immediately preceded by an unmistakable public service message asking, well, you know.
It's 10 p.m. Do you know where your children are?
It's 10 p.m. Do you know where your children are?
It's 10 p.m. Do you know where your children are?
It's 10 p.m. Do you know where your children are?
And believe it or not, we were able to track down the promo writer responsible for this piece of local news history. Mel Epstein's his name. He tells me it all began with a rare visit from the station's general manager, who needed something warm and fuzzy, as they used to say, to try to take the temperature down a bit during the social upheaval of the late 1960s.
It really came off the top of my head. I just said, how about it's 10 o'clock? Do you know where your kids are? He said, well, make it, do you know where your children are, and run with it.
He even still has the original piece of copy from that fateful day some 55 years ago. Understandably, it remains a point of pride for Epstein, who now calls California home.
I have an article from the New York Magazine. At that time, it was 101 Things to Love About New York City, and It's 10 p.m. came up number 12.
Wow.
10 p.m. Do you know where your children are? Right after I Hate Con Edison.
Over the years, it remained a constant in a world in business otherwise defined by change, as countless anchors, news formats, not to mention hair and clothing styles came and went. The message at the top of the hour stayed the same. As the decades passed, it came to develop its own unique cultural cachet, something immediately recognizable to generations of New Yorkers.
It's 10 p.m. Do you know where your children are?
Eventually, celebrities even got in on it, recording their own versions of the ubiquitous show open while awaiting their appearances on various Channel 5 programs.
It's 10 p.m. Do you know where your children are?
It's 10 p.m. Do you know where your children are?
It's 10 p.m. Do you know where your children are?
It's 10 p.m. Do you know where your children are?
We recently uncovered dozens of these pre-taped appearances in the Fox 5 archives. They provide a fascinating glimpse of some of the 70s and 80s biggest celebrities in the unexpected role of PSA announcer.
Hey, it's 10 p.m. Do you know where your children are?
It's 10 p.m. Do you know where your children are?
My colleague and current Good Day New York anchor Rosanna Scotto first ascended to the anchor desk in New York City on the 10 p.m. news in 1994. She was paired with fellow broadcasting icon John Rowland. Rosanna arranged a Zoom interview where I had the pleasure of meeting Rowland for the first time.
Wow, that's always something interesting to know. So, it's 10 p.m. Do you know where your children are? And for those of us who grew up in Atlanta and were children back in 1979, 80, 81, that wasn't a warm and fuzzy PSA that we heard every night. It was something that struck fear in our hearts as children. Now, I was 12, 13 in 1979 and all the way to 15 in 1981 during the time of the Atlanta child murders. And every night we would watch Channel 2, WSB, and I think it was 11 o'clock actually, or maybe even the 7 o'clock or 6 o'clock news. And it would be, it's 6 o'clock, it's 7 o'clock, it's 10, it's 11 o'clock at night. Do you know where your children are? And that was always something that struck fear in our hearts. It wasn't, like I said, it wasn't something warm and fuzzy. And if you grew up in Atlanta, you remember that. And you don't remember it as being warm and fuzzy. But I guess it started in New York in the late 60s. But 10 years later, it was being used in Atlanta that was talking about this murderer, this Atlanta monster that was going around killing killing young black children in Atlanta. At least 29 victims that we know of.
A lot has changed in Atlanta since 1979. And a lot has changed in our world since 1981 when there was a conviction for two of these murders, the conviction of Wayne Williams. What has changed is that we now know that DNA technology is much more advanced. It didn't exist in 1981. That it would certainly be in order for us to now look once again at evidence that the city of Atlanta has in its possession, evidence that the GBI has in its possession, to once again take a fresh look at these cases and to determine once and for all if there's additional evidence that may be tested that may give some peace, to the extent that peace can be had in a situation like this, to the victims' families, to we have done all that we can do.
We already have begun the process of going through these boxes, see if there's anything that was never tested that would now be of value. We don't know what we'll find. What we do know is we have an obligation. We have an obligation to these families to ensure that every imaginable investigative lead was followed.
A lot has
So, this announcement, excuse me, let me.
changed in Atlanta.
There. This announcement came in, what, March of 2019? About 6.5 years ago. Okay. And it was shocking and stunning for me because I had been a 14-year-old teenager in July of 1980 when I worked at the Dipper Dan's Ice Cream at Stewart Lakewood Avenue Shopping Center. And at the end of July, or about mid-July, I'm going to go into this in further detail. I had two encounters with Wayne Williams. The second encounter was with Wayne Williams and a young boy who I found out later became one of the victims, I believe was Earl Terrell. And after that second encounter, Wayne basically told me he was going to take care of this kid and come back for me. I quit out of fear. And I'll go into more details, but I tried to tell my parents and they wouldn't listen to me. And then the next May, when Wayne Williams got stopped on that or close to the bridge and was in the news, I realized that the person that I had seen in the Dipper Dens with the little boy was the same person as Wayne Williams. And I tried to tell my parents, and they didn't want me to tell anybody or say anything. And I'll get into more details on that. But then he gets convicted in March of 1982, not 81, Keisha Bottoms. And it was over, right? He was convicted for two of the murders of two of the adults, attributed to the murders of all the other children and adults. And he went to prison, and that was the end of it, right? That was it. At least that's what we hoped and what we thought. But for others, as she mentions, it wasn't over. And for me, in sort of a sense, it wasn't over either. So, but life goes on, and my life went on, and I finished high school, went to college, went in the military, got out, and moved around, and my life went on. But in the back of my mind, I always thought about what happened that summer of 1980. And I never told anybody. I never told any girlfriends or wives or friends or anyone except my parents. So I sought out a counselor and spoke to a counselor and talked about it. And I'll go into more on that, but basically came to the conclusion I was 14. There was nothing I could have done. And so I moved on. I put it behind me until March of 2019 when I see on Facebook Keisha Bottom speaking, talking about the DNA and talking about Wayne Williams and talking about, finding closure and all these kinds of things. And the first thing I thought about was, oh my God, they're going to let him walk because of lack of DNA evidence. He's going to walk right out of that fucking prison and be free. All because I saw Wayne Williams with one of the children that he killed. It was Earl Terrell. And I didn't say anything. And I had never told anybody, and I was married, and we were at the mall, and the day after, and I was telling my wife, trying to tell her what happened, and I started shaking and crying, and I didn't understand why I was shaking and crying, and then I realized that it wasn't me, the 50-year-old something me, that was shaking and crying. It was that 14-year-old little boy, the helpless little boy, that summer of 1980, that felt he could have been the 30th victim of Wayne Williams if he had not made it out of that Dipper Dan's ice cream parlor alive. And the guilt came back to me that I'd never said anything. I never told anybody. And so I told my wife what happened. She was the first person I told since my parents and a counselor. And I waited. And I did some research for the next 4 years. And I kept expecting to hear some kind of results from the DNA test, but nothing ever happened. And then I found out Mayor Keisha Bottoms left 2 years later, didn't run for re-election. She went off into the Biden administration, and now she is back in Georgia running for governor. And we still have no DNA test results. Now, not that DNA would really tell us that much, okay? Because Wayne was a very thorough serial killer. He read up on everything. When they searched his house, his room, they found forensics books on crime scene forensics and things like that. And basically, he read up on what the cops would be doing and looking for. And the murders that occurred were very unusual. The deaths of these children was very unusual compared to the deaths of other children previous and after. Now, when a child dies anywhere in the United States, usually the majority of the time it's a domestic case. That means either a parent or a relative hit the child, beat the child, stabbed the child, and it happened in their house or in the relative's apartment or property, and they found the body there. Very rarely do they hide the body or take the body out and dump it in the woods. So there's three things that are involved there. First of all, the victim, picking up of the victim, the killing of the victim and the dumping, or where the victim's located when the police are called. That's what happens in domestic cases. The victim usually knows the perpetrator, a relative, parents. They're killed at the location of the home usually, or near the parents, or near the relative. And the body's usually found in the same area. Now, there are other cases where children are killed, especially younger teenagers, older teenagers, in gang-related, drug-related killings, things like that. But the bodies are found where they're killed, either a drive-by, a stabbing, a shooting. The victim gets killed and shot. Boom, is found there in the yard or in the street where they're shot or killed. Nobody's doing drive-bys and then grabbing the bodies, putting them in the cars, and dumping them in the woods. Nobody's doing revenge attacks, stabbing someone, grabbing the bodies, putting them in a car, and dumping them in the woods or dumping them in a river. Very rarely does that happen. Now, there are men that kill women, prostitutes, whatever, and may dump them in woods or dump them in rivers, but very rarely are children ever killed. And you can go back and look and find that there's been hardly any case where a child was picked up, taken someplace else, killed, usually suffocated or strangled, and then the body dumped in the woods or river, as in the case of the Atlanta child murders. So that's what makes the Atlanta child murders unique, is the victims were always picked up. Rarely, never did anyone ever see them being kidnapped. There was no struggle. There was no screaming for help. Many of the victims were seen willingly getting into cars almost every single time, if they were seen. They weren't being kidnapped, fighting, struggling, help, help, help. Nothing like that. The victims weren't killed right there. They were killed someplace, usually inside. And I'll just go ahead and tell you, on Wayne Williams' bed. And then the victims were dumped in the woods in the beginning, up until November of 1980, when a news article came out saying that the police were linking all the killings because of fibers being found on the bodies were similar. Then, immediately after that, many of the bodies started being, or most of the bodies were dumped in rivers. And that's how Wayne Williams got caught on a stakeout. So, in the terms of evidence, DNA evidence, there's not going to be a lot related to the Atlanta child murders identifying the perpetrator, because there was never any evidence of sexual abuse, meaning there was no semen found inside the bodies, okay, the anal cavities, or on the bodies. This also could have something to do with the fact that many of the bodies were left outside for long periods of time, deteriorated, some even skeletalized. So you're not going to get a lot of DNA evidence off that. And then later victims were put into the water. Not a lot of DNA evidence off of that. So there's going to be semen from the perpetrator. There's going to be pubic hairs. There's going to be hairs from the head. Maybe some skin. So with pubic hairs, they never found anything. It either deteriorated, blew off, washed off in the rain, or washed off in a river. The only hairs that were found on the body of Patrick Baltazar underneath his shirt. So that means he had to have his clothing off, and the hairs got onto him and then clung when they put the shirt back on. As for skin, there was one victim who had clawed the perpetrator because they found skin underneath the fingernails, but at the time they didn't have the ability to test for DNA on that skin. So the person, whoever was choking them, had their arm, around the neck, and the victim was clawing them, the perpetrator's forearm, and got skin underneath the fingernails. Now, whether they saved that for DNA and sent that for DNA testing, I don't know. There was a story at the Shadowlawn studio of one of the owners who said she saw Wayne Williams with scars, serious gashes on his arms. And he said that he had fallen into some bushes and she didn't believe him. You could even see these scars in photos as Wayne Williams was being paraded down the hallways after he's arrested in June of 1981. Now, whether they can still test that skin tissue for DNA, I'm not sure if they even have that available. As for blood from the perpetrator, unless the perpetrator was cut or bleeding and they found that blood on the victim, which they never did, there would be no blood from the perpetrator. Now, there were dog fibers from a German Shepherd found on many of the victims. Okay, probably I think about a third to a half of the victims had this German Shepherd dog hair. They matched it up with Sheba's, the German Shepherd of Wayne Williams, very similar in texture and in color. But that was only in 1980, 81 or 81. In 2005, they did DNA tests on all the dog hairs found on the victims and found they're all from the same dog. And then they did a DNA test on the dog hairs from Sheba and found out it's the same DNA sequence as the dog hairs found on all the victims. So unless Sheba was running around killing little children and putting them in the car and dumping their bodies in the river, we can assume that since Sheba was Wayne Williams' dog, that either him or Homer Williams, who was 60 at the time, 60 something, was the perpetrator killing the victims. And how the dog hairs got on the children is Wayne was always driving around in his various cars with Sheba in the passenger seat. And when he was hunting, he never had Sheba with him, or he put him in the back. And the children would get in the front seat and pick up the dog hairs on their clothing. So they matched that. The only thing from the victims that was found at Wayne Williams or in his car was blood. There was blood that matched the same blood type as Barrett and the same blood type as Porter, found in the seat cushions of Wayne Williams' white station wagon. And so basically what would happen is Wayne Williams, because these guys are bigger and tougher, he tried to strangle them. They broke free. He stabbed them to death and then strangled them. And then after they were dead, he wrapped them up in his blanket, pushed the body into the car with the seats down. He didn't know, but the blood from the victims would drain through the blanket into the seats and down into the cushions, in between the stitchings of the cushions, into the foam of the cushion, the blood would go. And then Wayne Williams would dump the bodies, come back, wipe down all the blood with bleach and clean that up. But he didn't know about the blood stains that had seeped into the cushions. Okay. And that's where when they searched the car and tore open the seat cushions, that's where they found the blood, and the antigens and the blood types matched those of Barrett and Porter. Those blood types, in one of them, match only 5% of African-American males in the United States, and the other one matched 25%. So 1 in 4 African-American males in the United States. Now, those two items, they could send off for DNA matching, plus the hairs found on Patrick Baltazar that matched Wayne Williams' hairstyle. And they could pull DNA from that, and from the hairs, they could possibly have a match with Wayne Williams, and from the blood, they could possibly have a match for Barrett or Porter. But we won't know that until we get the results back from the DNA test, which it's been 6.5 years now, and we still don't know the results yet. And I find that completely unacceptable. Mayor Keisha Bottoms still had 2 more years as mayor to get the results, and she failed to do that. The city of Atlanta is now, the current mayor and administration is now the custodians of that and should be following up on that and getting the results. It doesn't take 6.5 years to get DNA test results. If you go to that DNA and Me or whatever all these various different DNA testing in the United States, you go online, they send you a kit. In a couple of days, you'll get a kit. You swab your mouth, you put it into the test tube, put the plug on it, put it back in the package, and send it back to DNA testing. And then within no more than a month, you're going to get back a piece of paper that's going to say you are 20% Irish, 30% German, 10% Italian, whatever. And it's going to have your DNA signature, which is completely unique to you. Okay? So your DNA is unique to your family. Okay? So if you take DNA from yourself and from your sister and from your mom and your dad, we're all going to have a very similar DNA. Okay? And let's just do it something like this, like a phone number. Say 503-996, and yours would be 1212. Your brothers would be 1213. Your sisters would be 1214. Your parents would be your mom would be 1211, and your dad would be 1210. And your granddad would be 1200. Okay? So from those sequences, you can tell who you're closely related to. Okay? And it's that way around the world. So a person who is of African American descent in the United States even would be more closely related to people in Africa than they would to other, say, white or Hispanic Americans in the United States. Now, there are some mixing there, so you may have some crossover, but generally it's going to be something like that, and that's how DNA works. And so if they had the results of the DNA from the blood, they can match it with relatives of Porter and Barrett. And if you have blood of a murdered victim in the car of the assailant convicted for killing 2 other people, that, my friend, right there says that he probably, most likely 99.99% reasonable, with reasonable doubt, killed Porter and Barrett. And also, in addition to the fact that Barrett's brother and mother said they saw Wayne Williams with the victim Barrett. So, and if Wayne Williams was convicted for killing Jimmy Ray Payne, and if Wayne Williams was convicted of killing Nathaniel Cater, and DNA comes back and proves that he was involved in the murder of Porter and Barrett. Now, someone else could have stabbed or murdered Porter or Barrett, okay? And then somehow the bodies got wrapped up and put in Wayne Williams' car, and he drove them someplace, okay? Well, that would make him an accessory at least, right? But considering all the information, it's most likely that he was involved in the murders of Porter and Barrett. Now, I'm going to go on here, but this news conference is what started me on my path. 6.5 years ago, I started researching the Atlanta child murders. And I had about 5 or 6 reasons to do it, or I've come up with 5 or 6 reasons now. First of all, I wanted to know what happened. What did I see? All I know is I saw Wayne Williams with one of the victims. I didn't even know the name at the time. And he frightened me and scared me so much that I quit that day. And I'll get into more of that in detail. But I wanted to know what happened. What did I see? Why did Wayne Williams really kill all these people? Were there more people involved? Were there more victims? What did I see? What was going on? And so I started doing research and these videos, and I was completely perplexed and amazed about what I found. And it went way beyond the Atlanta child murders and even involved people in my own family, okay, and other things. So not in the Atlanta child murders, but in other things related to the Atlanta child murders. Second of all, I wanted to find out, did Wayne Williams actually kill all of the 29 victims? And to the evidence that I have put together, I would say it's 99.99% certain that Wayne Williams killed all of the victims except maybe Angel Lanier. But I'm still working on that one. There's evidence linking Wayne Williams. Either people saw Wayne Williams with the victim or saw the victim get into Wayne Williams' car, one of Wayne Williams' cars, or the fiber evidence links the victims to Wayne Williams' bed in his house and his rug, or hopefully this DNA will link him. But no matter where you slice it, Wayne Williams is involved in the Atlanta child murders, whether he is the organizer, whether he is a worker, or whether he is a co-conspirator in the Atlanta child murders. I'm not quite sure exactly. I would say, if anything, he was the main sub-organizer that was underneath another possibility of things that were happening. Okay? Because the Atlanta child murders is just a sideshow to other things that were going on in Atlanta at the time, mostly involving organized crime, mostly involving pornography, specifically child pornography, of which Wayne Williams was a part of that, and the victims were part of that. No doubt. That's where all the evidence leads. And one thing I'm going to say is that when I go over all this information, because when I first started this, I didn't know what happened, where I was going in my first videos that I did. And then that channel got shut down by YouTube. So I'm starting this new channel with a backup channel with all the videos. So no matter what YouTube does or anyone does, it'll all be there online for people to see and for them to make their own judgments. All I'm going to do is present you with the evidence that I have located and found. And there's a lot more that can be found if we can get all the ATKID files released from the city of Atlanta and the FBI and the GBI. There's a lot more information out there. And all you have to do is follow the evidence and the facts, and it will lead you to what really happened. And that's what I hope to do and go over from what I found. Because this is not my opinion. This is not what I believe or think happened. This is what happened. This is where the evidence has led me so far. And when I started this, if I found out Wayne Williams was completely innocent, I would have said so. But the evidence points to Wayne Williams definitely being involved as the main perpetrator of the Atlanta child murders. The reason, I have no idea. The reason why he killed the children, I have no idea. But the evidence leads to the fact that he and other people were involved in the killings of the Atlanta children and the adults. All of them, except maybe Angel Lanier. Let's see. The fourth point is to get these DNA results released. There's no excuse. We should have had the results years ago. The people in Atlanta and the taxpayers of Georgia paid for those test results, and they should demand that they be released. Once that's released, we'll know a lot more. In addition to that, all of the documents related to the Atlanta child murders need to be released and put on a public website. Now, of course, you're going to have to block certain things, like you can't show photos of dead children naked, and you can't show people's names, okay, who are still alive. They may risk their lives as witnesses, but you can redact all that. And there's absolutely no reason why the city of Atlanta or the state of Georgia can't take the time to hire people to scan all these documents, scan all the evidence, organize it by date and by victim, and put it online. And that's one of the things that I hope to push for in these videos, is to get that done. And so that is what I'm working for. That's why I'm starting these videos now. I'm kind of glad YouTube got rid of my old videos, because some of them were embarrassing. It was like, I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know where I was going. I was guessing here and guessing there. But now I've got the accumulation of knowledge of 6 years, especially the last 2 years. And I'm going to take you step by step by step on what I found through different categories. And I don't have the autopsy reports. I don't have the police reports. I don't have the call lists from the tipsters, but I do have video footage. I do have a few witness statements, and we're going to piece all that together. And from that, we can get a pretty clear picture of what happened. It's like a jigsaw puzzle. If you buy a jigsaw puzzle at a garage sale and it only has 33% of the pieces, the other 66% are missing. Even though with that, you can still get a pretty damn good picture of what the puzzle is about. You can tell if it's a waterfall or a horse or an airplane just by the loose pieces that are out there. And that's what we have. We don't have solid evidence in like DNA, like witness reports, or all the witness reports, or autopsy reports, all this stuff, which I'm going to push forward to hopefully get the state and the city to release this information to the public. But you can get a pretty damn clear picture of what's going on. And I'm just going to go through it step by step, slowly. It's going to be a boring process. If you expect this to be a 5-minute TikTok video where I say it was this and that, and this is what happened, and here it is, and boom, boom, boom. And if you want to watch videos like that, there are plenty out there about the Atlanta child murders. There are plenty of AI videos out there right now that just rehash everything on the Wikipedia page. But they don't tell you the specifics of what happened. They tell you what happened, but they don't tell you exactly how and why it happened. And that's what I'm going to go into. And again, I don't know why Wayne Williams killed all these children. I have some ideas. I don't know what his thinking process, whether he was crazy or, he was an executioner. I don't know what the whole reasoning was behind that, but it's a very strange story, and we're going to get into all of it because it has more to do with just some guy goes crazy one day and decides to go kill a bunch of kids. There's a bigger picture with much more people involved. Okay? And I'm going to go into name names. I'm going to bring out individuals and expose light on them like I did in my last videos, but I'm going to show you systematically how it happened and why. All right, we're going to go into this next video here and see what more of Mayor Keisha Bottoms has to say on the Roland Martin Show.
/ Roland S. Martin, and don't forget to turn on your notifications.
Atlanta and the nation was shocked and stunned in 1979 through 1981 when 29 black children kept coming up dead in that city. Now, the police blamed a man, Wayne Williams, for most of those murders. He was arrested and convicted for the murder of 2 unrelated adults. Now, no one has been charged in any of the 29 children's deaths, but as a result of a new documentary.
So this is where I have to stop these videos because this is the problem. You have people like Roland Martin talk about stuff that he doesn't know anything about. Okay. Now you just hear him clearly make several mistakes in what he's saying. He says, first, there were 29 children killed. There weren't 29 children killed. There were about, I think it's like about 22. I'm going to go over in detail every single victim here. Okay. The last 6 or so were adults. I mean, it's over 18. Okay. And then he says that Wayne Williams was convicted for killing only 22, or excuse me, only killing 2 of the adults, and the other 29 children murders were left unsolved. Again, he got that completely wrong. 22 of the 29 victims were all attributed to Wayne Williams, plus 2 convictions of the adults. So we'll keep going here.
That is coming out, drawing attention to the Atlanta child murders. Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms announced today that the cases will be reopened using new forensic technology that may point to a definite killer or killers. Now, in previous conversations, of course, the police commissioner at that time, Lee Brown, he said that no doubt Wayne Williams was indeed the killer because he said as soon as Wayne Williams was convicted, all of the killings stopped. Joining us right now is the mayor of Atlanta, Keisha Lance.
And again, I want to say, like I said earlier, that's exactly what happened. Before July of 1979, they were killed. Most of the time it was domestic, sometimes very rarely drug-related or gang-related. Okay? The victims were always found near where the perpetrator lived or was. The bodies weren't moved, usually, most of the time, and dumped in woods or dumped in rivers. They were usually found where they were killed, even the gang-related stuff. And the same thing happened after 1982. Now, when Williams and Chet Detlinger like to confuse people and say, oh, the killing of children continued. Well, yeah, children did die. But in the specific way that the children were killed and the adults were killed, where they were picked up, willingly got into vehicles as seen by witnesses, none of them were ever kidnapped, yelling, screaming, help, help, I'm being kidnapped. None of that happened. They were taken someplace else away from where they were picked up and killed, most likely on Wayne Williams' bed, which is about a third of the victims show the violet acetate fibers that were never mentioned in the media found on the bodies. Even Darren Glass had violet acetate fibers on his clothing that he had previously worn. They never found Darren Glass's body. And then the victims were killed, most likely on that bed, and then the bodies either dumped in the woods or dumped in rivers. That never happened before, and it never happened since then. Now, there are people that are killed. They're strangled, they're shot, they're stabbed, and they may even be dumped someplace else. But never were they picked up, taken someplace else, strangled, murdered, garroted like they were. Some of the adults were hit over the head and stabbed because they fought back, and then their bodies dumped in woods or rivers. It never happened after Wayne Williams went to prison. So that's why Lee Brown was confident in what he said.
Lance Bob. Mayor, welcome to Roland Martin Unfiltered.
Thank you for having me.
So obviously, this documentary that Will Packer is working on with the mother of one of the victims is renewing the focus. He was on the Breakfast Club this morning. He announced that you would be doing this as well. But what specifically? Was it the documentary? Or was it something else that precipitated you saying we need to reopen and try to use new technology to figure out the killer of those 29 children?
Roland, it really was a combination of things. I think for me, having been 9 years old when these killings began, it very much was a part of my childhood and the backdrop of my childhood. But being the mayor of this city and now having 4 children of my own, ages 8 to 16, it resonates with me in such a very different way. And certainly bringing attention to the killings through Will's documentary, through some of our digital partners who we know have had podcasts and social media discussions on it, have certainly helped elevate the conversation. But for me, coming in as mayor of Atlanta, it is something that I always personally wondered, was there information available that I would now be privy to as mayor that I was not as a layperson? And so when I had a conversation about Will, I saw Curtis Walker's mother, Mrs. Leach, interviewed, and she talked about there not being any memorial and really feeling like her son had been forgotten. That part was easy because I knew that at the very least we could offer some type of lasting memorial for these children. So I announced that last week during my State of the City. But then last week when I saw that 2 cold cases in Alabama had been solved, I believe these young women were murdered in 1999 based on DNA evidence that had been put into a national database. I immediately called my police chief, Erica Shields, and asked her, had we tried to upload any evidence that we might have into the national databases? There had been a look at these cases a few years ago, but we know with having public DNA databases now, that perhaps there's something else that we can do and some other connections that we can make. So we don't know what we still have available to be tested, but we know with DNA, all you need is one drop. And I even asked Chief Shields today if, and I don't know the answer to this, and she didn't know the answer offhand.
So what she's talking about, like I said, is the DNA. And you can get DNA from a perpetrator, okay, through semen, hair, blood, pubic hair, things like that. Now, there was a case right around this time, the Sunset Killer. He had raped and killed several women back in the 1970s. And, you know, when the women were raped, if they lived, they went to a hospital and had a rape kit done on procedure done on them. They removed semen, and luckily the police, even in the 1970s, were smart enough to hold on to that in their evidence files, and because they never caught anyone. And recently, or back then, 2018, 19, they sent it off to get a DNA sequence on that, and everyone has a DNA sequence, okay? Your hair, your saliva, your skin, your blood, your bone, um, your tissue, your organs all have a DNA sequence that if you take it from that and run a DNA sequence on it, it's going to be from you, okay? It's going to be your number. And then, like I said, your number may be close to your parents' DNA sequence number, or even, all your cousins and stuff like that. So they have databases out there where people have done these DNA and me, and they put in these DNA sequences and they say, hey, look, you're, 90% related to Abraham Lincoln or Thomas Jefferson or some crap like that. And so what they can do is they can run the DNA sequence of the semen or whatever they find in the evidence, and then they plug that into those databases, and they can find the families that those people are related to, that the perpetrators related to. They can go to those families and they say, look, we're looking for someone because the description was like a 30-year-old man back in the 1970s. So he would be for probably in his 70s or something. Do you have someone that lived in that area, white male, whatever, because they can tell if it's white or black, male or female, and they're going to say, yeah, I have an Uncle George who's like retired in 75, used to be a cop in Rossville, which is what the situation was. And they found the guy and found out he had been fired after a couple other rapes had occurred in another city. And then he got rehired up in Rossville, and then the same thing started happening there. And they staked out his house. He ordered some pizza, and when you're eating pizza, if you leave crust, you're going to leave some saliva. They went and grabbed the pizza, got the saliva, took it to a lab, and were able to do a DNA sequence off the saliva on the pizza, and it matched that of the rapist from 50-something years before, okay? And then they went, got a warrant, and arrested him. And then because of his age, he pled guilty, and I think he's like in a maximum jail or something like that. But 50, 60 years later, they were able to catch him, okay? So this is what she's talking about. Again, there was hardly any perpetrator DNA found, except for the 2 hairs, I believe. But that's about it. Wayne was very, very thorough on what he did. He made sure he didn't leave semen. Maybe he used condoms or something. I don't know what he did. But he made sure he didn't leave semen. And, he tried to clean the bodies of his pubic hair. And he wiped down, everything with bleach to get rid of fingerprints, all these kinds of things. And he also used gloves when he handled the bodies. So that's what she's talking about, and that's what they're going to do. Let's see, I think I'm running out of time here. 7 minutes. Okay, we'll keep going.
Is it a way that we can go back and even perhaps look at some of the children's bodies and see if we tested under their fingernails, would there be any evidence after they've been buried that may still be
Again, the reason she's saying that, because there was one victim that had scraped skin underneath his fingernails, which I believe that was Wayne Williams, when he got his arms all chewed up like that. And that's how they can find the DNA, if they still have those skin scrapings. Now, in the Nicole Brown Simpson murder case, with O.J. Simpson, he came up to her and started stabbing her. And then Ron Goldman was on the other side of the gate and saw this, and he climbed over the gate, over the fence, and tried to stop it. And then the perpetrator, probably OJ, started stabbing him. And when he was stabbing him, Nicole Brown was still alive, and she reached over with her hand and clawed into the socks, the feet of the killer, and drew blood. And there was blood, there was skin underneath her fingernails, and they were able to DNA match that to O.J. Simpson. Okay, although it was very, very rough. And so this is probably what they can do with the fingernail scrapings, if they still have any of that from that victim. And that's what she's talking about. Now, I think I'm running out of time, but we'll keep going.
Available to us. So I know that when, people are buried, the bodies are cleansed, etc. I don't know the answer, but what I shared with Mrs. Leach today is it is important to me that history say that we tried. So we will go back, look at all of the evidence that we have, that the Georgia Bureau of Investigations has. Hopefully the FBI still has evidence, our neighboring jurisdiction, DeKalb County, and we'll see what's available. And we will certainly do everything that we can to at least provide some peace to these families, if at all possible.
Obviously, this was perplexing for then Mayor Maynard Jackson because in reading the biography.
All right, I'm going to pick this up next time, but I did want to say that Mayor Keisha Bottoms, she had a responsibility to follow up on this. You don't have to send DNA to a lab in Utah when the GBI has perfectly good DNA testing facility right there. They also have testing facilities at Georgia State, at UGA, and there's absolutely no reason to have sent it to Utah. And it's absolutely inexcusable that Mayor Keisha Bottoms had another 2 years she was mayor to not follow up on that and get the results before she ran off and was in the Biden administration for the next 4 years. And now she's coming back to Georgia and wants to be her governor. And I would say no, because, a good leader leads from the front and always follows up on their promises. And what we have is a mayor who made a promise to get some closure for the victim's family and for Atlanta, used taxpayer money to do that, but never followed up on the results of the DNA test. And I call that a failure of leadership. And now she wants to go on and lead the entire state. If you can't complete this one task, it's like you give your child a chore, and depending on their age, depending on what kind of chore they can do, and if they can't even complete the basic chore that you've given them, you're not going to give them a bigger chore. If you have your kid put up his clothes, you're not going to have your kid wash and iron your clothes if you can't even put up his clothes. Okay? So Mayor Keisha Bottoms doesn't really deserve to be governor until she finishes and follows up and concludes something that she started over 6.5 years ago. That's just my opinion for what it's worth. But we're going to follow up on this, and I'm going to keep going over the evidence. We're going to keep working through this. Now, after I get through this stuff with Keisha Bottoms, I'm going to go into my story and what I did. I don't know if everybody has watched my videos that got deleted a while back, but 2 years ago. But I'm going to go over the entire thing again, try not to be as emotional, and tell you what happened. And then go into the evidence that I found the last 6 years. All right, so take care, and hopefully this channel doesn't get deleted. And if it does, I've got a blogger I'm working on that I'm going to put all the raw videos right there. All right, take care. All right, bye-bye.